Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. It's a pleasure to face your inquisition on another week.
I will try to make it lenient this week, but unfortunately, no guarantees on that, sir. We have some very interesting questions for you this week. And it would be good to hear your views on some of these critical points, sir.
All right, I'm here.
And to our viewers, thank you very much as usual. Please do share the link if you're here. Share the link, and if you haven't subscribed, please just remember to subscribe so you get the alerts every time we go live. Sir, this week there's quite a lot going on. Some developments in Russia, which I'd want to touch on. But before we do that, there is a very important point that I think our viewers would be interested in hearing your views on. And that is the announcement today that the government of the United Kingdom is planning a £120 million scheme where they want to move refugees who come into the UK on small boats to Rwanda. So, what is your view on such a scheme? And why Rwanda?
I suppose nothing really should surprise me anymore in this world. I'm stupefied. Well, before they start saying Prof is throwing too much grammar, let me stop right there. I'll never believe that the United Kingdom, a United Kingdom government is capable of doing that at this time. Some historians might argue that why should I be surprised? These were people who shipped their own people to Australia, men, women, children, to go and populate Australia. And I mean, these are people who are famous for shipping during the war, Second World War, their children to Canada. Therefore, shipment of people is not strange to them. Although I find it strange. Now, what even makes it, I often wonder whether Boris Johnson and his government, whether they think, or whether they're simply coming up with atrocious policies to take the minds of the British people away from Partygate. Because it's only this week that the police announced that they have issued fine notices to the Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and to even the wife of the Prime Minister for violations of the rules made by that same government during the COVID-19 restrictions. Now, issues have just been raised about the disparity in the way in which Europe has received the refugees from Ukraine. And the refugees which they did not receive from Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, etc., etc. And some rationalization have been issued as regards why the reception had been different. And then you come up with this, which is basically racist. There are no two ways about it. Racist. Now, I can understand why, or I cannot understand, but at least I can give some, rationalization as to why Britain is doing it. How can I sit here and justify why Rwanda will be doing this? The only explanation I can give is this. First of all, let's get it clear. All African countries have been very, very generous about the way and manner they have dealt with refugees in Africa, African refugees fleeing civil war, fleeing drought, fleeing all kinds of climatic disasters. We've been very, very generous. We don't make any noise about it. People coming across the border, there are no checkpoints on the border in any case. So people coming, and before you know it, a village is set up, next to the border point, and they are settled there. And then when there is peace in their country, they go back. We Africans have done this, and let us claim it. We don't make any noise about it. But why would Rwanda allow basically refugees from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Syria to come into Rwanda? Question one, has Rwanda got the security capability to deal with a complex mixture of population? We know what has happened between the Tutsis and the Hutus. Now, this is being done by a Tutsi government. Is this an attempt to dilute the population of the Hutus and create another domestic? Is this another domestic disaster in the making? Is it? So that how many years down the road, then what Idi Amin did when he asked all Asians to leave Uganda will now happen to these innocent people who are going to be transported to Rwanda, which is not their choice of destination. So does this have to do with the domestic problems and domestic issues in Rwanda itself? And get this clear. How are you sure that there are no ISIS and jihadists amongst these people? Does the security apparatus of Rwanda strong enough to cope with another layer of instability that this will be brought on Rwanda? It baffles me. All the money in the world that Britain may give Rwanda will not help Rwanda avoid the wrath to come years down the road.
Sir, I was just going to look at that point a bit critically, and we've talked about this in the past when we start to look at the concept of democracy and development. And in this particular case, well, 120 million pounds is what they call the scheme. And Rwanda happens to be one of those countries that's doing well technologically in Africa. They happen to be one of those countries that maybe they've gone through their own war, their understanding diversity, the whole concept of inclusion and equality a little bit more. And for them, maybe they see this as an opportunity to develop their economy further and maybe make them a little bit more metropolitan in their makeup and their build up from that point of view, sir. So, what would you say to someone who says, "Well, yes, I hear you, Prof, but this is about developing our economy and developing our people"?
Well, I will remind such a person that Rwanda is still sitting on a volcano. It has not resolved the problem between the Tutsis and the Hutu. What you have in Rwanda right now is a Tutsi government, which is a minority government, sitting upon the majority Hutu, suppressing their aspirations by force. And just postponing the evil day, the exclusivity that characterizes the Rwandan government is a disgrace. And Western countries look the other way. Although they talk about human rights, the human rights of this government, but they look the other way. But what has just happened now, or as I said, 120 million, 150 million, 200 million, when it blows up in the face of Kagame, that money is not going to be sufficient to again get things going. I will most respectfully suggest that Kagame, if he wants cosmopolitanism to characterize his country, should turn and start to deal with the injustices that he's meted out and is meting out to the Hutu population in this country.
Thank you for that, sir. Since we've kind of started on Africa, maybe I should take one more question regarding Africa before we go to Russia and some of the developments there. And this one, sir, is regarding Ivory Coast. We touched on it briefly a few weeks back when we talked about the president of Burkina Faso who had been sentenced to life but was in Ivory Coast. But what we see now, sir, is that the Ivorian Prime Minister has tabled his resignation and that of the government to the president of Ivory Coast. And, sir, they want to reduce the number of ministers from 41 to 30. And my question to you, sir, how significant a problem is this in Africa and maybe in other countries of the world? The size of governance and the government infrastructure. Is this a model that other African countries should start to follow, reducing the size of government for better efficiency or for whatever other reason they have? What is your take on this, sir?
Well, given your intro, certain assumptions are clear. And I agree. I think most scholars will agree with you that the cost of governance in the third world or in the global south, let me be politically correct, in the global south is enormous. It should, rationally, it should be reduced. However, when you ask yourself, what problem or what issue led to this volume of governance? A bloated cabinet with bloated costs in administering the country. How did we get there? And it turns out that because one of the consequences of what we've discussed before, because our boundaries are artificial. Also, our boundaries are artificial. Means in each country in the global south, you have a multiplicity of nationalities. I'm not going to insult them by using the politically incorrect term of tribalism now, because most of them, I know of countries where some of them are 40 million, some of them even bigger than small countries in Europe. So when you are forming a government, you then have to address the question of inclusivity. Each group wants to be represented at the federal level or at the central level. They want to see their own people. And usually the cabinet is the most visible instrument of governance. They are not interested in how many of their people are on the Supreme Court, how many of their people are ambassadors, how many of their people are permanent secretaries, how many of their people are generals and brigadiers and admirals. They won't lump all of them together. No, are we represented in the cabinet? If you don't do that, then you end up being accused of marginalization, that you are marginalizing some people, and that can breed instability. And so you end up then having, depending on the size of the country, a bloated cabinet, and you end up spending money that should be earmarked for development. You end up allocating it to simply paying salaries within the administrative structure. The rational thing would be to cut down on this, but the reason politics differs from admin is because while administration can be rational, politics is very irrational. Politics is emotional. So I wish the President Ouattara of Cote d'Ivoire, I wish him well. If actually the reason for this resignation is because he wants to cut down the size of government. He came from a background of the World Bank, so I'm not surprised. But again, he should realize that Cote d'Ivoire had gone through a civil war. It's gone through turbulence. He cannot run Cote d'Ivoire along the parameters of the World Bank. He's got to put his feet firmly on the ground and see whether whatever cuttings need to be done will be marginal. But I agree with you. We need to bring down the cost of governance. But at the same time, we have to keep an eye on the need for inclusiveness within the governance structure.
Thank you for that, sir. Let me take us to Russia, Ukraine, and developments there. I may come back to some points in Africa, but let's deal with a very major development from the conflict, sir. And that is the fact that other neighbors of Russia, Finland and Sweden specifically, are now doing exactly the same thing, in a sense, that Ukraine did, that may have pushed Putin over the edge, and that is expressing a desire to join NATO. Is this too much of a risk for those two countries to be taken, or is it the right move given what has happened to Ukraine?
I wish, now I wish I know what is the right move or wrong move in that part of the world, because it's like you are damned if you do, and you are damned if you don't. Against the background that even several retired generals in the United States and strategists are now saying what I said maybe, how many months ago, that it was an error of judgment, military judgment, diplomatic judgment, to have taken off the table the possibility, not the certainty, the possibility that American troops or NATO troops may be on the ground, that they should never have been taken off the table. They should have left the other guy guessing. So, against that background, I will say this. If, frankly, NATO intends to consider and admit Finland and Sweden, it should not be business as usual. It shouldn't. They shouldn't take their time to go and brush their teeth, to go and comb their hair while considering the application. And then, while they are dragging their feet, what turns up on the border of Finland and the border of Sweden? Russian tanks. I'm suggesting that two things should take place within the next few days, or maximum 1 week. One, they should be admitted. The processes can be regularized later. They should be admitted. They should become NATO countries. That then means that Article 5 can be activated if Russia attacks either or both of them. And secondly, in fact, the second point becomes mute, because I was going to say, while waiting for the application to be considered, they will be regarded for all purposes as NATO countries. That the United States should make and not say, well, he will face severe consequences. No, I don't think Finland or Sweden want to hear that nebulous phrase, he will face severe consequences. No, say Article 5 will be activated if there's any movement from Finland or Sweden. As regards your question, whether this is not waving a red flag in front of a bull, since frankly we now don't know whether the bull is going to charge or not, you might as well take it for granted that he's going to charge. Sweden and Finland have come to the conclusion that their safety, probably their even survival as a nation or as nations, depend on being members of NATO. Because I myself am starting to come to the conclusion, after deconstructing some of the latest statements of Putin, I'm starting to come to the conclusion that actually Putin intends to wipe Ukraine off the surface of the earth. Of course, the soil will be there. And you may say, as long as the soil is there, as long as there are Ukrainians, emigres all over the world, all over Europe, Ukraine will never be wiped out. But if he overruns Ukraine, stations his troops there, then it's only in the mind, in the heart of Ukrainian immigrants that Ukraine will. But as a nation, as an independent nation, with membership of the United Nations, Putin's worldview does not include that. So I just think it's become academic whether their move is going to provoke him or not. It's become an academic question whether they do or not. Having indicated that they want to, that is actually sufficient to provoke him. Then he's been provoked already.
Sir, about, I think an hour ago or thereabout, a statement was released from the Russian side to say if Finland and Sweden were to join NATO, then they will go nuclear in their attacks and they would use more deadly missiles. Does that not put us on the brink of World War III?
It's not the only one with nuclear weapons. It's not. And I believe that the only way to then confront a madman is to also behave like a madman, or else he will then continue to blackmail you forever. So it will be membership of NATO today. Then what will it be tomorrow? That it will threaten, it will use nuclear weapons and other weapons. What will it be the day after? He might as well ask the president of the United States to come and sign a surrender document in Moscow, or else he will use nuclear weapons. If he threatens to use nuclear weapons, you tell him he's not the only one with nuclear weapons. I'm sorry that, I'm now sounding this way because I have grandchildren who are still children that I wish and I hope they will have a long life ahead of them in peaceful, prosperous world. But not where they are subjected to the boot of a dictator. Then the war against Stalin, the war against Hitler was purposeless.
Someone is saying here on YouTube, sir, is that why not all the other Scandinavian countries, examples of Denmark and Norway, maybe all of them should just band together and say we're joining NATO?
I agree.
Do you see that as a possibility?
I agree with that point of view. They may be waiting to see how NATO treats the application of Finland and Sweden. They may just be waiting. And if they see that, there is movement, purposeful movement, actually you may get this flood of applications coming in. Biden has wanted a world of democracies where he's got it. Thanks to Putin, he's got it.
So let's look at some of the comments that were coming out of Ukraine specifically now in the last week. One of the key points has been the issue of the use of chemical weapons. We talked about it in Syria. There was the red line. In this current war, it's been talked about as the red line. And if you cross that, we're going to do something. And I think you've also said this as well, sir, that we need to get to a point where it's not just we will do, that maybe things that the Western governments should have done and just gone for it straight away. But in this particular case, they said, if it is found that chemical weapons were used, it's going to be the red line and they're going to have to do something. It appears that that red line may have been crossed in Mariupol because eyewitnesses are starting to talk about some funny gases that were dropped from the air that affected the people. If this is found to be true, what is that response that the Western government should now give to the situation?
Mr. Moderator, you have been very, very clever in the way you have posed this question, because it's all surrounded with, if it is true that gas might have been used. You didn't say that gas was used. Gas might have been used. With all this conjectural situation, let me beg off answering that question and leave it to, number one, the scientists and the experts who have to now make a definite finding that gas has been used, and then leave that to our heads of states, people in government, as to whether. But the thing, however, where I will agree with you is the use of gas should be regarded as a red line. Because if you don't, the next is then going to be nuclear weapons. That will be where the escalation will go. But as to, as a scholar, I have some flexibility in approaching issues. However, let me also have the humility that I don't know what is under the table, not to talk about what is on the table. I don't know the kind of weapons that America has, Britain has, France has, I don't know. And so to that extent, don't let me rush to judgment as regards what they should do.
All right, sir. I will respond in kind, sir, that is the expert professor at work of political science. The expert professor at work. Thank you for that, sir. But let's still stay on Ukraine. One key point, sir, is the point around Germany, because Germany is being accused of a weak response overall to the situation in Ukraine, to the extent that the German president was quoted as saying he wasn't wanted in Germany, in Ukraine, sorry. He planned to make a trip with other European leaders, similar to what had happened with Boris Johnson, showing solidarity, walking in the streets. But there was some sentiment that he wasn't wanted. Should Ukraine be treating Germany like that?
You see, there is a perception in Europe that Germany should still be made to feel guilty about the Second World War, and that from that position of guilt, it should be possible for Germany to be made to give the ultimate sacrifice. And I don't think that is fair. Germany was the first off the block to cut off that pipeline, if you recall, of gas, supply of gas from Russia to Germany. What more do they expect from Germany? Yes, it is true that Germany is still importing coal and gas. But is Germany the only one? No. All members of Europe are actually dragging their feet about importation of, cutting off importation of gas from Russia. You are asking the Germans to give their all. If they cut off gas and coal importation from Russia, there is nothing, the German economy will collapse. Is that what Ukraine wants? From the Ukrainian point of view, I could see how they probably feel they've been hung out to dry, but not by Germany. It's by the whole of NATO. If you want other countries to give their all, you want to treat them the way you are treating Germany, since they will not impose that flyover ban, then don't receive anybody, whether Boris Johnson or Macron or anybody else. After all, you have asked them for their ultimate sacrifice, ban overhead flying, and they have said no, that they cannot do so. So I think that it's not fair what he's doing to Germany. He loses nothing. He should be careful, because actually he himself, before this war, didn't show what one will call 100% accurate judgment in some of the things he did, some of the things he said, and so on and so forth. So if he takes the position that he's being hung out to dry, that his country is being destroyed, and nobody is putting troops inside and troops on the ground. You know, if you point one finger at Germany or at NATO, let him notice that three fingers are pointing back at him himself. Whether, given the position he found himself, he should have bought into, I am sovereign, free country, I can do what I want. Well, I'm afraid the lesson of this Ukrainian war in international relations, when people start to teach, using it as an illustration, is that when you are next to a superpower, you are actually far from God. It's not just Ukraine. That's what lesson Cuba has learned. Till today, if Russia is occupying Crimea, is United States not occupying Guantanamo Bay in Cuba? And for how many years? In spite of United Nations resolutions, has the United States lifted sanctions on even medicine to Cuba? Has it? So, you know, I think we may be drifting close to where somebody from a sense of victimism may start to exercise moral judgments that really it shouldn't be. Not now. Not now. Let's finish the war first. Let him survive the war first, and then we can make judgments as regards who did what and when.
So let's take one more question specifically around Ukraine and the response from President Zelensky. And this one links him to Africa. It's been reported, sir, that he now wants to speak to the African Union. Now, sir, why this late in the day? Is it because he's not getting the right response from the West? Now he's turning to Africa. Number two, what should Africa's response be given the request that has now come from Ukraine?
Haven't blamed him for his response to Germany. Let me support him for his approach to Africa, asking to speak to the African Union. Yeah, you probably feel that it's too late. I don't think it is too late. He has only 24 hours in a day to operate. And he might have felt that speaking to four members of NATO, members of the European Union, where he may get weapons, who are in a position to impose sanctions against Russia, that those should be his priority. Number two, how much does he really know about Africa? He might have felt, talk to America, talk to Europe, they'll get the Africans on board. But actually, from the anti-Russian position that Africa took initially, whether at the Security Council or at the General Assembly of the United Nations, the resolution asking for Russia to be kicked out of the Human Rights Council, most of the African countries abstained. And when I say most, this included countries that had voted for Russia to be censured. They've moved gradually now not to vote against the resolution, but abstention, which kind of shows that they now want to move into a position of neutrality. We need not, or if you want, maybe next week, but not now, to tease out, to deconstruct why majority of African countries, overwhelming majority, will now be feeling neutral about this war. Now that he wants to talk to us, I think the African Union should give him a platform. Diplomacy is all about talking. It's not about agreeing or not agreeing with one party or the other. He wants to talk to us. That doesn't mean we will be breaching the position of neutrality by listening to him. Let him talk to us. He's not going to ask us for weapons. We don't have weapons to sell to him. He's not going to ask us for banning Russian flights into Africa. I don't know into how many countries Aeroflot flies into. I think we should listen to him.
Let's pick one more question. We have about 9 minutes left, but let me put one more question to you here to get your response. And this is still related to Africa. And this is the US Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa has again announced that he'll be stepping down. And this is less than 6 months in his position there. Clearly, that area seems to be a problem area for US foreign policy. Why is that? And what approach do you think the US should be taking in relation to the Horn of Africa?
You know, if I were an American and I was offered the job of Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa, I will thank the president most gracefully and walk back into my cabin, wherever that cabin may be located. It's a thankless job. And when your country is faced with the kinds of foreign policy problems or foreign policy issues that United States is faced with now, Ukraine, problem with China, etc., etc. You know, Horn of Africa gets into the back burner. The countries there themselves are not helping the issues. If I could just pick one country for illustration, Somalia. I don't think the Somalian elite, the Somalian political elite, I won't talk about the average Somalians, the average farmer who probably cares more about lack of rain. I won't talk about the Somalian market woman who wants to earn enough to send his or her children to school, and they want the same thing that each one of us want. But the Somalian political elite, I don't really think they care whether their country falls over the edge into the pit and breaks into pieces. As long as their faction is controlling government, That is all they care about. When you are confronted with a situation like that, how can you get your government, your own government? How can you persuade your own government that there is a solution to the crisis that is there, and that it is worth the time of your government to get involved? The ambassadors at post probably will keep an eye on the movement of the Russians and the Chinese and what have you in that area. But to have a special envoy there, no, it's not worth the time of that special envoy, unless that special envoy is just looking for a government job to hang on to. So I'm not surprised that this has happened.
All right, so let me throw one last question in.
But you said the other one was the last question.
No, I'm an apprentice political science student as well.
Okay. Okay.
But we have 5 minutes, sir, and I think you can do justice to this one in 5 minutes. Pakistan. We were talking about, I think 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, the response of the former prime minister to the issue in Ukraine. But now he's out of government. A new government has come in, and the first thing they're trying to tackle is a National Economic Advisory Council to help address some of the economic challenges in the country. What is your take on what has happened in Pakistan, and what impact do you think that's going to have on the region with this change in power that has taken place there?
Okay, before I tackle that question, because you in your intro, you mentioned a foreign policy initiative by Imran Khan, the former prime minister, about Islamic countries helping to solve the question in Ukraine. I believe that I would like to see the Pope in a behind the scene format, in collusion with the primate of the Eastern Orthodox Church that is based in Istanbul, I believe. Anyway, it's based somewhere in Turkey. And it's the primate of the whole of the Eastern Orthodox churches, which includes Ukraine and the Russians. I would like those two to have a line onto Putin and hope that the Holy Spirit may simply pass down that line to him. Now, having got that off my chest, I've said it on this program, on this platform before. If you ride the back of a tiger, actually the only way to get off is to end up inside him or her. I believe that it is true that Imran Khan's electoral victory was engineered by the military, the Pakistani military. That is the most powerful, quote-unquote, political party in Pakistan. You cannot afford to offend it, whether you are in government or out. You cannot. And when last year, Imran Khan's party fell out with the military, I knew his days were counted. And then look at the shenanigans that then went through. Deputy Speaker of the House from his party declaring that a motion of no confidence was unconstitutional, and he seizing that opportunity to dissolve Parliament. He took the intervention of the Supreme Court to say, no, you can't, all of you can't do this kind of things you are doing. You have a Parliament, let's hear the voice of Parliament. So, to me, 3 lessons we need to learn. The number 1 lesson is, if you are going to dine with the military, you just know you cannot get off that dining table without severe repercussions. Number 1. Lesson number 2, especially to the global South, have a system where certainty becomes a major factor in the resolution of your political conflicts. And that certainty can only come from a Supreme Court judgment. So let there be a procedure where within a few days of crisis arising, the Supreme Court can step in, and not the kind of situation where you ask people to go to court, and for the next 18 months, the system, the judicial system is going up and down like a yo-yo. I think that the Pakistanis have shown the advantage that certainty can bring into it. Number 3, I'm aware that Imran Khan has said he's going to the streets. That is dangerous in Pakistani politics, because you go to the streets, as we have found out in our own SARS and SARS program in Nigeria, others can also go to the streets, and the beneficiary is usually the military, especially in the case of Pakistan. How many coups have they had? A lot. They will now come in again as a party of law and order and stability, and people will listen to them. So I think Imran Khan is playing a dangerous game. Normally there will be elections in 18 months. Let him wait for that elections and, try his popularity without military support, and you'll see how few seats he will get in Parliament.
Thank you very much, sir. We have indeed now run out of time, and that would be my last question for the evening. Thank you very much, sir, for being here. To our viewers, like I said at the start, please do just hit the like button or subscribe so you get the notifications when we go live again. Thank you so much for being here. And sir, thank you very much for being here as well, sir. Good night, sir, and good night to our viewers.
Good night.